Creativity is the process of creating or birthing an original idea. It is the engine that moves the world forward, opening new possibilities and enabling human civilizations to progress or regress in myriad ways. Writing, an ingenious human invention, is one such creative process through which we document, share, and communicate our ideas and thoughts. Writing transcends death. It enables us to speak to people through generations, defying the constraints of time and space.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Shrenik Rao. Shrenik is the editor-in-chief of the Madras Courier, a 236-year-old news brand which he has revived to a digital format. He is also the founder of 7MB, a digital media company, and a documentary filmmaker. Shrenik is a fellow at the University of Oxford's Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and an alumnus of the London School of Economics. Before we move into the conversation, I want to give a quick shout out to Zencastr, Podcasting Made Easy. I've been podcasting for about 2 years now, and I stumbled onto Zencastr while I was recording season 2 of the show. Though I only use the audio recording version, they have a video recording feature as well, and you can now edit your episodes on the platform. If you're a podcaster looking for an all-in-one podcast workstation, then check out Zencastr. You'll find a special offer link in the description of this episode, for which you'll get 30% off by using the code ClosetWriter. Now let's tune in to hear about Shrenik's journey with writing, journalism, entrepreneurship, and more. Hi everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. This week we have with us Shrenik Rao. Welcome to the show, Shrenik. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Sangeeta. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, so I have a lot to ask you. And first of all, I mentioned this in my introduction that, about the Madras Courier, which I'm a big fan of, which I found during the pandemic, and we'll get into that later. But the first thing I want to ask you, which I ask all my guests on the show, is what is your earliest memory of being creative?
My earliest memory of being creative is me taking crayons and just scribbling, writing, coming up with car designs, and coming up with weird names for my cars and making up stories. And I used to also come up with, I'm a big fan of anagrams. I take words and mix them. And I sort of play with words. I used to do that without anyone actually teaching me about, the technique of doing that. So I used to come up with, at that time we had an ambassador car, and so ambassador cars were nothing like the designs that I used to draw and the names that I used to come up with. The name that I came up with my car was Zoom Car.
Oh, wow, okay.
And they're all very sort of semicircular. They didn't look like the Fiats or the ambassador cars of the time. And I guess that was the earliest memory of me expressing whatever was in my head, whether you want to call it creativity or whether it is imagination or whatever. And I guess the foundation for that would be the curiosity of why are things the way they are, you know. My dad always used to tell me that I used to ask him questions like, why are lemons green in color, yellow in color, or why are oranges orange? Why do we have stars in the sky? why are they called stars? You know, I used to ask him questions like that. And so, if I were to think back about why I was um, sort of designing or sort of drawing cars in those shapes, I guess one logical reason would be that maybe it was just easier to just draw a semicircle and put two circles and call it a car. The other one would be to reimagine something which is very different from an ambassador or a Fiat, which is more rectangular or, of that shape. So that's my earliest memory of, sort of playing with uh, ideas or documenting ideas that were in my head, or trying to be creative. If uh, Again, it's one's definition of creativity, but I guess um, that's my earliest memory.
No, but that's really cool that you used to kind of come up with like car designs essentially as a kid. Like, I mean, obviously your version of that, but that's so interesting. So, wait, were you ever interested in becoming like an automobile engineer or anything like that?
No, not at all. My life almost was decided, in a sense, my career trajectory, my parents thought would be okay. He should take either the civil services because everyone in my family was into civil services.
Okay.
And I guess even when I was a kid, I had this academic aptitude. So they thought either civil services or academics. One, because the prestigious jobs, or uh, more important than prestige or anything is just the security of it, sarkari naukri or the government job. Um, Most Indian parents wish for. It's also because my father and a lot of my other relatives worked with the government, so there was that uh, expectation, I guess, to be in the civil services. But then I had a secret desire to work in the media. Um, I used to look at World This Week by Shrenik Rao and think, whoa, this is cool, I used to read up a lot of newspapers. When I was a kid, I used to read the Hindu, I used to read the India Today, I used to read anything and everything that I could get my hands onto. And so my desire was to, somehow do something as cool as breaking the Beaufort story or, uh, uh, you know, being in the media. Communications was also something that was so far out uh, for me, in the sense that that was the era of uh, television broadcasting and um, journalism. I heard stories of you know um, how journalism could change the world, from my family, who were all civil servants, but they would discuss everything was about stories and did you read this? Did you read that? The prime minister said this. How can we? All those discussions about policy related matters, or anything that we learn was coming from newspapers and journals and so on. And so I guess for me, it was a secret desire uh, to learn. It also fed into my curiosity about why are things the way they are. This the the more you know, the more you want to know. So this is a great platform to learn. So uh, if that's the question,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
no,
know if
no. I
I've
was just
answered it.
no, no, no. I was just curious because when you said car design, I was like, oh, like, what did you study in school? Especially, obviously, when you're in high school, you have to choose a stream from like science, commerce, arts. So, what did you then eventually end up picking up?
So I ended up picking up arts, civics, economics, commerce. So at the time, though I performed really well in school, most people thought, a lot of my relatives, my father's friends, family friends thought I'd be taking up engineering.
Okay.
And uh, but my parents didn't have that expectation. They were like, do what you really want to do. Um, they didn't even force me to think about civil services, but that was their expectation. They would say, okay, that would be a good job, kind of a thing. And so I took economics and commerce, because we didn't have the college that I had applied to didn't have other options for history or philosophy or geography. That was a combination that I would absolutely love. Um, Civics was essentially politics, basically, for Politics 101, economics and commerce. So the idea was that I would get into a bachelor's and take history, uh, politics, and public administration. And that's essentially what I did. So in school, I did, after school, I did, um, you civics, economics, commerce, which is plus two version. And then after plus two, I did history, uh, politics, and public administration.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I never did I encourage the idea of being an engineer or anything of that sort. I was always, I guess, even now, I'm very methodical in the way I do things. But it's always about the big picture, which fascinates me. The big picture is something that really gets me excited. And the only way to accomplish your big picture is by breaking it down into smaller parts and methodically accomplishing them. This is not a creative process. I don't know if it is a creative process, but this is uh, even when I write or when I am working on my journalism or when I'm doing something, I need a routine and I need to be very disciplined with my time. Um, uh, I could have 1,000 creative thoughts, but if I don't channel them into sort of structuring it, giving that sort of a large uh, idea in a proper shape, nothing gets executed. Uh,
No, no, because then, okay, like you obviously do sort of history and you study this, then how do you kind of make that switch to, oh, like I want to actually give media and broadcasting a chance. I want to, try my hand at journalism, especially. And I assume your parents would have been okay since they were already kind of like, oh, hey, like, do what you think is right for you. How did you kind of then decide that, okay, I want to like give this a fair chance and see if this is for me?
it was actually a combination of several things. By the time I had finished my master's, 20 and a half, by the time I finished my master's. And so that was a time when I was talking to my father about, what my next steps would be. And he said, would you like to give civil services a try? My mother was like, oh, you should absolutely give civil services a try. But my heart was not so much in it, I guess. So, and also at that point in time, my father was not well. And so uh, I decided that we may not have, I knew that we may not have a long time with him. So I decided to be in Hyderabad and figure out something that I like in Hyderabad so that I could be with him. So I basically found a job in a television production house just so that I could get my ropes into it. I wanted to do something more with writing, but at that point in time, uh, there were more openings, I guess, with television than in writing. In fact, I went and reached out to a newspaper called Deccan Chronicle.
Oh, okay.
And then they did offer me a sort of an internship role for about 2,000 or 3,000 rupees or something like that. I decided to be very honest that it's not a newspaper that I enjoyed reading ever. And that's exactly what I said in my interview as well. She said, "Oh, you don't read New American Chronicle." I said the quality could be better. I thought she was offended, the lady who interviewed me, but I decided to be honest, and I guess that's where I started. It's a combination of my personal circumstances, trying to make the most of my personal circumstances, and also trying to get the best that I could do. And after working in the television company for a while, I, it it was mostly a production related job, so it wasn't really uh, creative, but it was you have your hands in everything from organizing the shoots to talking to people to going through scripts to etc etc talking to the broadcasters etc. And then from there, I took on a job in a startup, which was then a startup television broadcasting company. I didn't have when I joined that they didn't give I didn't have a proper title, but within a few months, I guess they thought I was good, and they gave me a title of vice president programming for like a 22-year-old. That title sounded very fancy, and I did have a lot of, I guess, freedom to uh, you know do things that I thought were interesting uh, at that time. But the freedom existed only in theory, not in practice, because of budgetary constraints, a whole host of other local office politics and things like that. So I worked there. It was great learning, especially about broadcasting. And even when I had joined, I knew that that wasn't for me. And after my father, and by then my father had passed away. Um, and so I continued for that, and then I was really burnt out. And it wasn't something that intellectually stimulated me. So the initial phases were really great with learning, from being a super geek to dealing with the world, uh, dealing with people, trying to understand office, dealing with office politics, and talking, going and talking to broadcasters in another state or in Delhi or whatever. And 22, I was a kid. I looked like a kid, and when people looked at me with a fancy business card, they would either assume that I was part of that family or whatever, because you know, I was still, I looked like a kid. But then they would take me very seriously the moment I started talking to them. After that came my real, uh, that was when I really sat down and I thought, okay, what do you want to do with your
Okay.
life? That was the question. So it was very clear that I had always known that that was not what I wanted to do, because we were doing listing top 10 Telugu songs, Telugu film songs, or interviews with some celebrities here and there. Um, and the one thing that I'm really proud of was, I took part in setting up the the news division for that channel.
Okay.
That was exciting for me. I was really, really excited. I didn't really get so much into editorial, but I was more part of the management. I still had that title, vice president programming. So I was very excited about that. After that, I applied to the London School of Economics. It changed my world. It changed my perspective. It changed, in a way, the way I see the world, and the confidence that I've had in being able to say, okay, I will take this head on and I will do it. So that was where, if I were to say where my career really started. I guess I would say my career really started while I was at LSE. Um, and that was when I thought, uh, my question was always, why do we have to uh, do only, cinema, right? We're a nation obsessed with cinema, but there are different forms of cinema which are superb, which document reality and tell real life stories that no fiction can even come close to, right? Um, there's a saying, fact is stranger than fiction, and in most cases, that's true. Um, and so, why can't you tell long form stories that, or documentaries that tell great stories um, that are interesting to the rest of the world? Or why haven't we as Indians, developed a culture of producing really high quality documentaries, right?
But do you think that's changing?
Oh, it has changed dramatically. I mean,
Yeah,
the elephant
exactly. Yeah.
whisperers, right? The elephant whisperers is a true example of how far, how quickly, uh, we have come in our journey, or not only as producers but also consumers of content. Uh, Content is a word that I don't generally want to use because
Yeah, a lot of us don't want to use that
yeah,
word.
content for me is bad word.
I think it is for a lot of people. I've realized through this series of interviews, honestly.
And there are some brilliant documentaries which Indians have produced, but not consumed, right? Not accessed earlier. This was before the advent of the internet, right? But after the advent of the internet and social media and so on, I guess you have so many opportunities to access some really great storytelling. Yeah, I digress.
Oh, no. So basically, you were talking about how you were getting into, like, you were basically questioning why there weren't enough documentary films, since those could essentially be better than feature films and mainstream cinema.
Sure. I mean, that was the start of me, deciding to make documentaries. And when I was at the LSE, I started reading a lot about, uh, you know, Robert Mugabe. The front page news would be Robert Mugabe. He had a clenched fist, and then there'd be a lot of news about him. But my earliest memory of Robert Mugabe was when I was a kid, and reading about him. He was Indira Gandhi's friend, and he came to India. He was well received, and so on. The sudden change of him being that liberator, you know, uh, a person who fought against the apartheid, to being a dictator was a bit sort of surprising for me. I was actually reminded um, of a little story that I had written when I was a kid. It was called Robert Mugabe and his Zimbabwe. That was the uh, that was the story that I wrote. It was so when we were kids. When I was a kid, what I used to do was my dad used to have this exercise. It was not really his exercise. Actually, I used to read newspapers every day, take notes, and write my own report.
Oh, okay.
This was when I was 7.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was not doing that when I was 7, but okay.
So yeah, so when I was 7, I used to come back from school, take newspapers, read, take notes, and put my own analysis. And when my dad came back from work, from the office, he would look at it. I used to write with a fountain pen back then. My I remember the headline and the body copy was in blue, The date and my name, byline, was in green
Oh, okay.
this time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
uh, and my dad used to come back. He used to take it very seriously. He used to read my report, and then he used to edit it with his red pen uh, and type it up on a typewriter. And that was our evening edition.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I was reminded of my article, uh, and I thought, oh, what would it be like to sort of do a documentary on Zimbabwe? But I've never been to Zimbabwe. I had no contacts in Zimbabwe, let alone think of doing a documentary. It was like a very ambitious, big picture thought, right? Like, how much would that cost? None of that came to my head. Um, and then I thought, okay, I'll try and see if I can make a documentary. And then I set about breaking it down into pieces, and then I realized that the BBC did not have access to film in Zimbabwe. CNN was banned from filming in Zimbabwe. Sky News was banned, officially banned from filming in Zimbabwe. And to my luck, I found a contact who I was able to reach out to and say, hey, I want to do a documentary. And he said, I can try and find out. I can't make any promises. Just send out a letter. Fax. This is the president's uh, uh, personal secretary's fax number. Fax. Send him an email and see if he responds. So I sent a fax. I was on a student budget, but still I didn't know what I was thinking. I sent I sent out a fax saying, I'd like to, come and do a documentary about Mr. Robert Mugabe and Zimbabwe and so on. I'm so and so. So he said, yeah, okay, come to the
Wow.
documentary. I was like, okay, great opportunity. And then I said, okay, can you, one was access to filming, but who am I going to go and talk to? So I wrote to all the other officials. I wrote to the president's office. I wrote to the vice president's office. I wrote to the leader of the opposition. Then I figured out a friend who was at the LSE, who was a Zimbabwean. She helped me a lot with a lot of local contacts, with a lot of phone numbers. Uh, and then I reached out to the cameraman who used to work with the television network that I used to work in. And he said, yeah, let's go do it. I've been wanting to do some really cool stuff for a very long time. And I'm sick of, working in these studios all the time. And so off we went to Zimbabwe with my meager savings, or whatever they were. Interviewed those the vice presidents of Zimbabwe, the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. These were guys who were not accessible to the global media at that time, to the world's media. And so that's how my journey into documentary filmmaking started. And that was also, in a way, you could say, it, it was my entry into entrepreneurship. It wasn't something that I thought, okay, I didn't think, okay, I'm going to make billions by making this documentary, but I thought, oh, this is an important story. This is a great story that needs to be told. There's not something that was already done, so I need to do it. That was how I started. But then I always enjoyed writing more than actually being on camera or, you know, um, doing on camera stuff or behind the camera stuff. What I really enjoyed was the intellectual stimulus and the creative process behind doing anything, right? Why do we do what we do? The larger question of what really drives us always, what can we learn? What is actually fun in doing? What's the fun in doing what you're doing, right? Um, I guess that's what motivates me even till date, right? If there's a story that's not been done, oh great, let's find out and do it. It's, it is, it's that feeling is like a drug, you know. It's You cannot describe it. The exhilaration of finding out something and actually sharing it with the others is fantastic. It's something that I really struggle to explain. There's no word for it.
Okay. No, that's fair. So then, okay, you make this documentary film, and then is that when you sort of decide, hey, okay, let me just go for it and start like a media and broadcasting company and see what happens from there? Or did that still take time?
No, I actually had nurtured entrepreneurial ambitions from a very young age. You know, yeah, so I wanted to work in the media space. I had been following Prannoy Roy and Ram for a very long time. And Prannoy Roy had started NDTV. Back then, he was in Doordarshan, and then he started something called Star. Basically, Star was Rupert Murdoch's broadcasting channel, for which NDTV used to produce. So it used to say in all those news broadcasts, it used to say an NDTV production. So I used to wonder what that was, and then I started researching. So N. Ram was the editor of the Hindu. Of course, it's a family business, but um, those evening editions that I had mentioned. Since then, I've had that, um, I guess, secret desire to perhaps own a media company, run it like the way I want. There was also another inspiration from a Telugu news entrepreneur. His name is Ramoji Rao. He used to he used to own a newspaper called Enadu.
Okay.
And also down south in Kerala, there's Malayalam Manorama, right?
Yeah.
It's a family-run business. So I was reading about media businesses even when I was in school, uh, and it's not the more than the money part. The idea of really running it and sharing news was always very exciting to me. When I was doing my documentary, I knew that technology was changing the broadcasting industry, but uh, it wasn't something that you could make money on. So you couldn't live off by um, by being an internet journalist, right? At that time, it was just .com and you know all that. And television broadcasting was the big deal at that time. CNBC, TV18, um, CNN had just come, and so it was all this enormous change in the media industry happening, and there wasn't many. There weren't many um, regional news channels. There weren't many regional publications. Now, of course, it's there's a hell lot that you can consume. When I started making these documentaries, I thought, okay, I enjoy doing them. Um, Let me continue. So we went from producing that documentary was taken up for distribution by a British distribution company. It did really well, and it sort of enabled us to do more and produce more. And so that was how we
And this
started.
particular documentary went to Cannes as well, right? Because I thought I read something.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
basically, it was featured. Yeah, basically, they took it to a market in Cannes. Yeah, and then it sort of, they had a sort of a display and whatever. And then it gave me that additional uh, push to move into uh, more documentary making. But then this bug of wanting to be in journalism. There are so many stories you want to tell, and you can't. Documentary is documentary production takes a long time. You need if you want to produce a serious documentary, it does take time. For me, it was always about um, doing more. We produced documentaries. We did a lot of television stuff, but then this bug of evening editions was always there. And I think around then the Deccan Chronicle had crashed. It was mismanaged, and there was some. Um, and so I thought maybe we could sort of maybe this could be an opportunity to acquire Deccan Chronicle. Okay, I did some due diligence and research, and I realized, I'd be heavily into, I'd have to borrow money, or I'd have to get a lot of other investors on board. And more importantly, you'll have to fire. I did not really enjoy the kind of, I didn't not forget enjoy. I did not agree with the kind of journalism that they were doing at that time. And so uh, I was also advised against it by people who worked in Deccan Chronicle when I was doing my due diligence. And so I left it and I thought, okay, what is it that I can do? Realize this dream of trying to one day own a newspaper.
So wait, just to track back a little bit, because I want to make sure I'm getting the timeline right here. So then, obviously, once you did that first documentary film, 7MB was already founded, or you founded it like after?
Just after that, just after that, just after the documentary, we founded 7MB. So when I was a kid, I had written a story called Dawson and the Dream Factory.
Oh, okay.
So my first media company was called Dawson Media. So after the documentary, I started teaching at a university in Scotland. I started teaching media information in politics. Essentially, my specialization was in political communication. And so when I was teaching information, a master's program called Information in Politics, which essentially looks at how politicians, governments use and abuse information to push their agenda, narrative, etc. How did they do it in Brazil? How did they do it in South Africa? How did they do it in different parts of the world? So the Dawson and the Dream Factory was the name that I came up with it, and Dawson Media was the name of the first company. And after that, when I came back to India, we started 7MB.
Okay. And that was also when you started working with the History Channel, because you did a series with them
Yeah,
as well.
so yes, and we with 7MB we did. After I came back to India, I did another crazy thing, which is I cycled from the southernmost tip of India to the northernmost.
Yeah, I read, and I believe you filmed that. It's called the
Tree cycle.
tree cycle. Yes, yeah.
That's right. That's right. I cycled. So when I was teaching in Scotland, I used to cycle a lot. Even when I was a kid, I used to cycle a lot. And after I got into college and whatever, I stopped cycling, and I really enjoyed cycling. So when I was in Scotland, I used to cycle a lot, and I thought, why didn't I cycle in India, right? Like, that's my country, and I enjoy cycling in Scotland. Why not in India? And I haven't. It's such a great way to experience a place. So I cycled from the southernmost tip of India to the northernmost, and so we filmed that, and that was all part of uh, the documentary series that was also made. So that was broadcast on NDTV. I think the NDTV guys started something called Greenathon or something like that. I guess, when you are hooked into journalism from a very young age, you're constantly following that, whether consciously or unconsciously. Your attention gets, it helps you get that perspective on life. One of the greatest things about being a journalist or being a storyteller is that you have to inhabit somebody else's world and try and understand it from their perspective to tell their stories. It's also such a great honor that somebody is actually sharing their stories with you.
Yeah.
You know, I've had the honor of speaking to prime ministers and presidents, as well as uh, oracles and rickshaw drivers and taxi guys and snake charmers and so on. And regardless of where they are or who they are, regardless of the titles, you see the humanity underneath it all. And that's something that only a profession like journalism will really enable you to do. That is my perspective. I don't know if I've answered your question. I'm just
No, no,
going
no.
on and
I
on
no. It's
about it.
just no. Because especially when you brought this point up, I was just recalling one of my previous episodes, which I did on season one with Dia Rekhi. So she's also a journalist, and she was talking about. So she primarily does business reporting, but in between she was into crime journalism, and she was talking about that phase and how she said when she was covering those stories, because it can get very dark and affect your mental health, but something it does is when you're covering especially like true crime, it's like you're really interacting with families who've gone through so much, right? And then you're essentially with almost with them, kind of sharing the emotion they're going through, what their headspace is. And she's like, it really kind of does something to your humanity, in a sense, like you become more empathetic, you're more sensitive, and you're more sensitized to a lot of things that happen. So I was just kind of recalling that. But no, I think that's a very fair point you brought up. And at least based on journalists I've spoken to, I think this is something that does come across from a few of them who I've spoken to. So yeah, so then obviously, there is 7 MBA happening and you're still kind of thinking about, okay, evening edition, what do I do in the news space? So then how do you kind of then stumble onto the Madras Courier and be like, oh, hey, here's a 233-year-old brand, that news edition, that publication that's not really there anymore. How do I like kind of just revive it?
So here again, it's again a lot of it goes back to my childhood. Uh, I remember my dad and I took a train from Madras Central, and we were going to Madras Central or Egmore. Madras Central, I think. From Madras Central, we took a train to go to some other train station, right? We were sat on the top berth, right? My dad was on the other side and me on this side. And we used to play quiz games, right? So one of his question was, okay, and those quiz games had some money as well. I used to get 2 rupees, which in those days was like a big deal for me. So one of his question was, so what's the oldest newspaper in South India? So I was very cocky and I said, oh, the Hindu. And he
Okay.
said, hey, I got you. You lost. So I was really disappointed, right? Like, what is it? How do I not know that this is the oldest newspaper? And then he said it's Madras Courier. So that was my introduction to Madras Courier, right? And so when I was thinking about um, how do you revive, I didn't even think about reviving it, but when I was thinking about how do I tell stories, how do I, see the kind of journalism that I want to see out there, and there were a lot of questions I had too. Why is it that the New York Times or the BBC or the Washington Post, why is it that these publications are considered to be global, whereas when it comes to Indian publications, they are considered to be Indian, right? Why is it that we don't have a global reach? And for that, a bulb went off in my head, which said, okay, this is a time when a lot of newspapers are not able to adapt to the changing global dynamics of the internet, right? The internet allows people sitting somewhere in New York, Australia, let's say New York, Sydney, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, or Tiruchirappalli to access anything with a click of a button, right, on their phones, on their laptops. And by then, there were some publications um, which had gone internet, which had taken to the web, and they had done really well in terms of their valuations, etc. But still, I was not convinced about their business models, and I didn't think they were sustainable. I thought either they would have to depend on grants from governments, which again means you lose your journalistic freedom, or you'll have to basically depend on investors without delivering any sort of returns. How can you get a brand? I thought, okay, what about Madras Courier, right? Uh, that was when I thought, okay, what about reviving Madras Courier? So when I thought about it, I thought maybe you can't. I mean, who do you buy it from? How
Yeah.
do you figure out? How do you figure out how to uh, buy this? And that was those questions which I started taking seriously, researching, really led me to do a little course on intellectual property rights. I
Okay.
did um, I went and attended a sort of IP law course in Nalsar in Hyderabad, and then I decided to uh, also go take advance it uh, at the University of Oxford. That was where I applied for a fellowship. Part the reasons were I'm working, and I'm not having enough time to actually think through this very carefully. Right? Am I just kidding myself, or is it a real possibility to um, actually make it happen? So that was when I thought, okay, I'll maybe stop. I have the luxury to stop it for a few months, take the fellowship, figure out how to make this a reality. So at Oxford, uh, the Madras Courier was originally started by an Englishman called Richard Johnston. And when you read the story is fascinating. So he came to India, uh, and he came with the intention. That was when the technology of printing newspapers was also at a very nascent stage. And so Richard Johnston had worked in the military, and so he thought he could make money uh, in India, because for most Britishers at the time, how do you make money? You go to India and make money, and then come back. So and so his story was very interesting, and he went back to England. The newspaper ran for several years after that, and then it went defunct. There was a guy called Hugh Boyd who was the editor. He ran it even after Richard Johnston went back. So I went back to England. When I was at Oxford, I would go to London, and the British Library has all these archives. I would access their archives. I spent almost, I spent months researching about the Madras Courier, going to the British Library, sitting in the Bodleian in Oxford. I would, I had some friends who were lawyers. I would uh, go buy them lunches, etc. Sit with them, take their advice, figure out a genealogy map of Richard Johnston, figure out if somebody actually owns it or owns the rights. Then looked at World Intellectual Property Organization and figured out, how you could go about doing that. So a lot of homework went into that. So when I was at Oxford, apart from the research I was expected to do, this took up a big chunk of my time. When finally, mm, I had compiled a 500-page report or something like that for myself. It was like, okay, documenting every single thing, ask questions, what can you do, what can you not do? And then among those was also one question, which was, why is the New York Times not meant only for New Yorkers? right? Or why is the Washington Post not only for people of Washington, right? It's not. Why can't the Madras Courier be a global publication? Why can't we have, and if you're, what makes a publication really global, right? BBC is ultimately British Broadcasting Corporation, right? So, but they have a global presence. But whatever you do, you have to start, and only when you start and you take a step after a step after a step after a step, and then make you build it step by step, right? And all of this is something that really excited me, the idea of reviving a 230-year-old newspaper into something that is fresh, current in this day and age, in the internet age. Was the idea itself was very, to me, it was a mad idea, but it was a worthwhile idea. It was something that was possible, it was doable. And there were a few other publications who had also uh, done that. There were two guys from IIT who did that with Swaraja, and even the Caravan, I think. It's not as old. It's not as old as the Madras Courier, but the Caravan is also something that they had in the family and they revived. So, and then I had missed the boat because 2014 election time was a big deal, and Scroll had started their they started doing really well by then. And so I thought, okay, how do we do it in a sustainable, manageable way? What sort of stories do we tell? Why do we even tell stories, right? Do you want to say the same thing that everybody else is saying? How do you differentiate yourself? I had asked a few so-called experts, and they said, "Oh, celebrity first. They're good. Eyeballs second. The same standard formula that I guess repulsed me in the first place, working with television networks. They had come up with, and it did not sound any different from anyone else, right? So it didn't seem like a strategy, but it was something that they had written down, a PowerPoint presentation that they'll probably want. And so I scrapped it all out, and then I thought, okay, what is it that will give us um, an element of uniqueness? What will help us really find readers who will love what we write, who will love the stories we tell? One of the things that I thought would be, okay, I've always been a very curious person. Ask a question: why are oranges orange? Why do dogs bark? Things that we take for granted. Or why do we eat rice? Right? In most South Asians eat rice. Um, why do we eat tomatoes? Right? Where did tomatoes come from? Why is Indian food so spicy? Has it always been so spicy? Right? Um, it's also, I guess, driven more by wanting to learn as much as you can about who we are, why we do what we do. I guess it's destiny. I don't know if it is destiny. I don't know if it is individual effort. But the tagline for Madras Courier in Latin means whatever men do. Quicquid agunt hominas, it's in Latin, the three words. Quicquid agunt hominas means whatever men do. The appropriate thing to say now would be whatever humans do. But at that time, it was whatever men do. But whatever people do, right? Why do we do what we do? And you'd be surprised to see how much we're connected to the past in so many different ways. So I thought, okay, why don't we connect? When we tell news stories, why don't we look at the larger picture? Tell stories that connect the past to the present in a way that is interesting, um, less didactic, um, more engaging. And perhaps that's not something that people have been doing. Why don't we do more stories on things that a lot of us think about, but we don't really know answers to? And also, there are so many unique things about South Asians, which are very global, but have not been documented, right? Why don't we document those? So the first story I wrote was a story called "The Curious Case of of a Bollywood Beauty." That story, so we published on the 12th of October, 2016. So in October, on the 12th of October, 1785, Madras Courier, the first edition of Madras Courier was published. So
Oh,
on the
wow.
12th of October, 2016, when we revived it, we started with that story. So it basically looks at the life of an actress called Kushbu.
Okay.
So her name is not Kushbu. It's a screen name. Her name was Nakat Khan, and she started as a child actress. She thought she will find a career in Bombay in Hindi films. She wasn't able to find a career in Hindi films, and then she moved down south, and her life changed beyond imagination. And people started selling Kushbu saris. They started selling Kushbu idlis, and uh, they built a temple for her in Tiruchirappalli, and they started worshipping her. And though that worship was 3 days, 3 times a day, and they started social service activities, free education, free meals, etc. In her name, she was given a name as Kushambika Devi. This is so bizarre but so interesting, right? And we've never reflected on these things, right? So, and then I think there was once where she said, premarital sex is okay for it's okay for girls to have premarital sex or something like that. And then they started breaking her temple down, and then they started, you know, you know, things like that, right? So it says something about star worship. These are very unique things about India, and these are things that we could reflect and write upon. The very simple thing about chilies, right? Can you today imagine Indian food without chilies? The moment you say Indian food, people say, "Oh, it's spicy."
It's
But
spicy,
did
yeah.
you? Yeah, it's spicy. That's it. And especially for me, who lives in Oxford, and if I say, "Oh, come over for dinner to my house,"
Yeah.
and they'd say, "Less spice,"
Yeah.
right? Or no chilies.
Yeah.
But chilies were introduced in India by the Portuguese, right? Just 400 years ago. And so is the case with tomatoes, potatoes. Potatoes were introduced by the British, tomatoes. These kinds of stories, the kinds of stories that we do, which may be considered trivia, but also are a reflection of who we are. Quick quid agunt hominas, right? Whatever men do. My interest in global world affairs, global politics, etc., also has driven our editorial towards diplomacy, international relations, those politics, those kinds of areas. There's a regular following for Madras Courier, like you said. You discovered Madras Courier during
The
COVID, right?
pandemic, yeah.
Once when we started the Madras Courier, we went against the grain of everything that the experts told us. Define your audience, right? Chase celebrity. Um, we thought, okay, screw that. What will people? What is it that will help us be unique? How can we add value to our reader? So that was a driving factor for us. In a lot of our editorial discussions, we have these. Should we also introduce short form stories? Should we just do 150-word edits? Oh, it'll give us a lot of numbers. Or should we? Oh, we have to be more discoverable. So should we get onto YouTube, or etc., etc., etc. It all starts with the germ of an idea, and if you're able to persist on it, ruminate on it, meditate on it, think about it, envision what you want to see, it'll happen. There is a Shah Rukh Khan dialogue. I'm terrible with Hindi,
Oh,
but
that Om Shanti
eh,
Om dialogue,
yes,
where he
yes,
wins the
yes.
award.
Yes, Sari Kainad, and that's all I know. Something, something, something. Sari Kainad. The whole universe conspires to make your dream come true, right? The essence of it is that, you know, uh, if you truly believe that you can accomplish something, and if you're really driven to do something, and if you meditate on it, if you find ways to do something, um, you'll always be able to move forward and move forward and move forward and move forward till you actually accomplish what you want to accomplish. I guess the evening editions that we started, me and my dad and I started when I was a kid, had a big impact in a sense in the way I thought about things. These are not Madras Courier is no longer an evening edition, by the way.
Yeah, it's not.
Um, if someone from the Hindu is listening, right? Uh, when we started publishing, within 2 years, we won the Best Digital News Startup Award. We won the gold, and Hindu won the silver. We beat the Hindu,
Oh, wow.
and within 2 years. And then when I was picking up the award, the editor of the Hindu, who I met the first time, he said, "You know, somebody started forwarding these articles, and I would forward them to my newsroom, and I would say, why the hell aren't we doing these stories?" And I thought, oh, okay, good to know. And I guess, there's a long, long, long way for us to go, but we're not, we didn't take external funding. It's a very deliberate choice. We didn't take money from a billionaire or a big politician or anything of that sort. We are, you know, currently in the belief that there are enough number of people who will help us and support us to do what we want to do and what we love to do, right? And that will happen as long as we're able to add value to the end reader, right? Give them something to give them something new to learn, a different, unique perspective, rather than just chase, um, you know, just TRPs and numbers or Google Analytics data and this and that.
Yeah. No, because actually that was the other thing I was coming to because I feel like, especially at least with the Madras Courier, whenever I go in and I read a piece and I come out, I just feel smarter. Like, honestly, like I've genuinely learned something. And I feel like, I mean, at least for me, I don't get to do that with a lot of pieces of writing. In that sense, because I think also it's the kind of subjects you're talking about, the kind of themes, and I find it really cool that, along with sort of politics, socio-political things, cultural pieces, you've been like, obviously they're talking about books, you're talking about, there's poetry, which I found like so fascinating that you were taking submissions from like readers. So it's really cool to kind of see this sort of agnostic format in a sense, because you genuinely don't know what to expect when you go in, and I think that's one of the things I love about the brand in general, that you go in and you're just surprised. So yeah, I think more power to you and the team for, I think, creating that with this. But I'm also curious about how you go about, sort of deciding and curating the sort of pieces, because I assume there must be like a bank of ideas. So then how do you kind of figure like, okay, these are the kind of stories you want to do? Because I'm sure, I would assume at any given moment, you probably have like at least 10 to 20 ideas you guys would love to work on. So how do you kind of decide what to prioritize and how to go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you, first of all, thank you very much for, saying such wonderful things about the Madras Courier. I get emails into my inbox saying, oh, thank you, we love this, we published a story about Ajivikas the other day, and we got a lot of response. We published a story about Vedic astrology, and we got a lot of response. So thank you very much. I hope we continue to, keep telling really interesting stories like this. The issue of, trying to come up with stories and, deciding what really goes in when is very subjective. If we also go by, it's a curious mix of data, editorial calendar, what's happening around the world, just so that you're not totally, completely, disconnected. What is it that we can really uh, share that adds that is kind of scholarly but also interesting to read? What material do we have to justify what we have to say? Um, so we have a calendar planned for at least 3 months ahead, right? So we it's a broad calendar. It's a broad calendar that we think, okay, this is the editorial calendar. This is what we. When it comes to poetry, right? Uh, Poetry is actually something that was done in the Madras Courier 200 years ago. So when I sat in the British Library going through the archives, I thought, oh, wow, they published poetry. So what they used to do was, back in those days, they used to wait for newspapers to come all the way from England to India. They used to wait for those newspapers for the readers in India to know about what was going on in England. So the sailors who would travel in those ships would write poems and send them to the editor at Madras Courier. And then he would choose uh, which ones were good and which ones were not, and then he would publish some of them. So when I read some of those poems written by sailors 200 years ago, they were really fascinating. It was about, it was so human, right? Or when will I go back to England? Or when will I? Or I saw such and such a girl, and I thought she was really pretty, and then whatever, our lives moved on, kind of a thing. And so I thought, okay, we need to have a platform which publishes poetry in mainstream journalism, right? It's a form of it's also a great way to express one's creative thoughts. We decided, yeah, we'll publish poetry. And what we can also do is take poems, add a visual element, which is we commission an artist to come up with or an illustrator to come up with a corresponding visual art, whether it's abstract or, whatever. How does he interpret the poem? We get that and then publish this poem. So that's how poetry happens. But when it comes to the editorial selection, right, it's a combination of several factors. If it is reporting from the ground, then we should have enough material to back and double check whatever has been said in the field, right? So it's a combination of several things, but underneath all this is the one fundamental principle that we don't want to compromise on our editorial ethics, editorial integrity, and journalistic integrity. That is supreme for us.
I think that really shows also, honestly, in the quality of the articles that come out. It really does. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just happy that we can have this conversation because I was so clear when I was doing this season that I wanted you here to talk about this. So I'm just happy to have you here talking about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But no, having said that, obviously, social media has become this sort of huge tool for journalism in the sense that I feel like now almost anyone and everyone can become a journalist thanks to the internet and social media. And you do have people kind of writing and putting out things on, say, Instagram or Twitter, which is now X, and in that sort of space, and obviously you have a lot of publications who have social media channels and they're kind of putting out, blasting their pieces through those mediums as well. So then how do you kind of use, because I know the Madras Courier in between started an Instagram page, but it's not very active. And even with you, I could only find like a Twitter with X profile. And so then in an age where everyone kind of is struggling for visibility and discoverability, then how do you kind of position yourselves, and like does social media not fit into like brand building for say yourself or even like the Madras Courier and other things you do? Like how do you kind of view that?
Social media has a role to play. I don't disagree with that. Um, our primary focus until now has been newsletters, right?
Okay.
The number of people who sign up to our newsletters far outweighs the social media engagement. Up until now, that has been the case. There's also another advantage to newsletters, which is people see your emails every day, right? You engage with them. We want to build a community. For us, the priority is to build a community. You can build a community on social media. Algorithms are constantly changing. So if one social media platform changes its algorithms, then you'll have to keep on struggling again, right? So there has been a lot of our readers have also been asking us to start a print publication, right? So there's a journalist, Thakurda. You must have heard of him. He called me once and he said, "Oh, your stories are timeless. Your stories are timeless. Why don't you come up with a print publication? Or you sort of compile your stories and come up as a print magazine, you know." So we're exploring all these. When it comes to social media, right now our entire focus is on newsletters. Our budgets are very, very limited, right? We don't have an unlimited budget to play around with. So for us, it's very important to keep our head up and be a sustainable publication, right? And I understand that social media is one way to do it. Even within social media, our focus has been very, very narrow to newsletter. The other thing that we really want to do is to actually talk about the Madras Courier in closed group discussions or in colleges and people where people would want to read these kinds of things in places where people would want to read nerdy groups, basically people like you and me.
Fair.
Right, nerds would discover us. Somebody who's interested in these kinds of stories, somebody who's constantly engaging with writing the world around us, will be a regular reader. We're not against social media, but I think that's something that we really need to work on. But there again, our focus has been so narrow that I wouldn't mind broadening it a lot more. It's also perhaps personally my disdain for what I see on social media every day, where everything is brand bullshit, right?
Yeah.
We want to be genuine players who, uh, instead of speaking about ourselves, we want our leaders to, take us seriously and spread the word. Ultimately, word of mouth uh, is far more powerful in community building than uh, any social media pretensions. I may be wrong. I may be wrong, but so I love the New Yorker, right? I love the Financial Times. Just like how I really looked up to Enron and the Hindu when I was a kid, right? It was you learn something new, you learn something interesting, you see the quality of journalism, and then it's your quality of journalism stands out, and only then will people talk about you.
No, that's true. I completely agree. I think also because I know the New Yorker, New York Times, they obviously have fairly active Instagram pages, and it's kind of curious to see what they're doing now. They're doing like these carousel posts with like very pop culture references, which are actually really fun. I see a lot of people sharing it, and I see traction coming from there. So I think it's interesting to see how each like publication kind of approaches social media in that sense. I think it really depends on how you use it. I know at least for me, especially when it comes to the podcast, I discover a bunch of my guests through social media. So in that sense, it's been really helpful. But yeah, otherwise it can just be white noise, or like if you're not really adding or using it in a certain way, for sure.
So when I was doing my fellowship, my research was basically looking at news brands and trying to see what they were doing, right? There was Vice Media. So in my research, I was looking at two publications. One was Vice Media and one was Financial Times, right? Vice Media was an upstart, right? Which was valued at about 6 billion US dollars. Started by a guy called Shane Smith, and the kind of documentaries that they did were very sort of in your face, YouTube documentaries. The language was all sort of unconventional. They would use swear words in their journalism, in their reports. The reporter would go and have marijuana with some guy, and right. So basically, it's immersive journalism. That's what they called it, immersive journalism. The valuations went up the roof, right? Uh, and Financial Times, which was an established legacy newspaper, was then sold to a Japanese company for $1 billion, right? So an established newspaper like Financial Times was sold for $1 billion, whereas Vice Media had a valuation of around $6 billion. Why is that the case? Is it sustainable? That was one question. I was also looking at a lot of other newspapers, they were not newspapers, but internet publications, right? Um, I don't know if you remember, but there was Scoop Book.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to do a lot of listicles. They used to call them listicles, and they were the sole purpose was to get as many views as possible, right? But it was not a sustainable game.
Yeah.
They had to wrap up and shut down. They pumped in millions and millions of dollars across the world on publications like that, but they did not sustain. You read about it and you forget it, right? So there are challenges to the news and media industry as such. And the evolving technology, the evolution of social media, where anyone can put up anything, and then that counts as news. Or stories without references also count as the truth, right? We live in a post-truth world, and so we need to be extremely cautious of what we read and what we feed ourselves. And in that era, where the assumption is that people don't have more than 20 seconds to read, why would you take the headache of writing something which is about 3-4 minutes long, or 5-7 minutes long, or a long form thing which is about 6,000-7,000 words? But then, counterintuitive as it may be, as a strategy, that is what really, really has been working for us. People are willing to spend 4-5 minutes reading the entire article, engaging with us, writing to the editor, sharing that article through. If it's a controversial one, it's shared quietly through other social media platforms or emails or WhatsApp or whatever. If it is not a controversial, or if it's not politically sensitive or controversial, people share it on Twitter. Or our hope is that if the article is good enough, it takes a life of its own.
I was coming to is obviously now with again the advent of social media and the internet, because you now have so many people going into like obviously digital publication, be it with websites, newsletters, apps. Everyone's kind of in that space now, and the way news is consumed is kind of evolving. I think even especially with like Gen Z and Gen Alpha and whatnot, like you see, like literally they're consuming news on Instagram and like X. I see people like literally just reading stuff off that and saying things. So then how do you kind of see journalism evolving in that sense, especially in this space? because it has kind of, it's more in a digital space now. How do you see it? Like, where do you see it going?
There is value to editorial process, right? When somebody puts up nonsense without any reference, without due diligence, due editorial diligence, it has its consequences, right? The fake news that you get to see, the proliferation of fake news on social media is primarily because of lack of editorial due diligence. Anyone can say anything on Twitter, Instagram, whatever. So you could stand in Andamans and say you're in Maldives. With now AI, you know, techniques coming in, you can even change your background and say whatever, right? In this age of artificial intelligence, editorial processes become very, very, very important, especially if you're a serious news. If you're not a serious news player and if you don't care about your journalistic integrity, then you can do whatever. But it's always a mistake to equate serious journalism with what's put out on Twitter or on social media platforms. The editorial process that each article goes through in reputed publications is of great value, at least for people like me, right? Ultimately, when we read something, if we eat junk food, we know we get diabetes, right? If we consume a lot of junk diet, we know we're going to be misled. Just because you have a Twitter war and there are more views on Twitter for a particular narrative or B sort of a narrative doesn't necessarily make it a fact or truth. Truth can be interpreted in multiple ways, but facts are very important. And that's why you have the proliferation of fact checking websites, right? And the kind of value serious journalism offers is going to be much, 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 much more important for people who are serious about understanding the world in a world of fake reality. So the truth is somewhere there, you have to, and to sift that through, filter that to give you like a nice filter coffee. Like to sift through that, it's to give you that filtered, edited version of it is the role of a journalist. But that thoroughness of the editorial process is what really makes a difference.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, do you think AI will ever replace editors though?
These are big debates that we are having right now. Um, um, for as long as humans have existed, right, there were all these discussions that um, we've had. So when radio started, people said print was going out of fashion. When television started, people said nobody's going to listen to radio and print anymore. It's only going to be television. When digital started, people started saying television is going to die. Print is going to die completely. But what we are seeing is that there is a coexistence of various mediums and various platforms. So artificial intelligence driven news, artificial intelligence driven editorials will have a role to play, especially in a fast paced world where you're under pressure to produce news very, very fast. Technology will help to a certain extent, but will it completely replace human beings? I am not so certain that it will happen in my lifetime, at least.
Okay, fair.
They could be mass uh, layoffs of journalists. They could be a lot of codification of knowledge, right? And that codification of knowledge need not always be very balanced. That codification of knowledge also could be very biased based on what the coder deems it fit, right? So in that instance, I think the value of actually going into the field and reporting and telling stories is priceless. At least as of now, I have not seen a robot journalist who would go to the field, take notes, come back and write it. So AI is a tool, and I think you should always, in my opinion, you should always approach tools with an element of skepticism, right? So when I was at the London School of Economics, we had internet, so quote unquote, internet evangelists come from Google and so on, come and deliver lectures about democratization of information, right? What they said was that information technology is going to change your life. It's going to change for the better. It's going to do all these wonderful things. And true, it has done a lot of wonderful things. But what they never mentioned, not once, was that it is going to lead to the breakdown of social cohesion, right? It is going to, I guess it was Dalai Lama who said, people can connect with each other instantly,
Yeah.
but are growing further apart,
Put apart, yeah.
right? It takes wisdom, not just buying into not just buying into market spiel, but really classifies as an educated mind. And understanding the world around us comes not from buying into market-led tools. Yeah, simply put, my opinion is that there is a lot of room for journalists to do their job really well. There may be mass layoffs, especially by billionaire-owned news networks. Uh, but yeah,
No, but yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. I feel like we're still a long way off from AI being able to do everything that a person can do. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting conversation that's going around. I think generally among a lot of writers, be it with advertising, copywriting, or like editorial, whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I can go on, but I've already exceeded time, so I should really start wrapping up. So we're coming to the last set of questions. So, you know, when we were earlier, talking over email, you mentioned you were coming out with a book later this year, which I wasn't aware of. But can you tell us something about that?
the book was commissioned by Penguin Random House. And the one thing that I can mention is that it's a story that's never been told. It's a historical nonfiction, the story of a guy who you have not heard of but has had a significant impact on history.
Okay, interesting. Do we get a date of when we can expect it? Approx?
Soon,
Okay. Okay, 2024, sometime in 2024.
releasing soon.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
fair. That's fair. Also, I mean, given that your career in media and broadcasting, have you faced any sort of assumptions or misconceptions about what you do professionally? And you're just like, no, this is not true.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I guess, misconceptions about what we do. Um, so initially, um, when somebody said, "Oh, he's a filmmaker," the initial idea was that okay, filmmakers are a certain way, right? Or when you say journalist is a certain way. I guess these things matter only if you let them matter to you, right? For me personally, I don't seek validation from uh, other people. Uh, the people who matter most to me are my immediate family, and internally, if I seek validation from the others and I'm doing something that is good for the others, but I'm internally, if I'm not feeling good about what I'm doing or about myself or as a person, then it's time to change, right? I've always been directed by my internal moral compass, internal professional compass, right? If you write something well, you will know whether you've done a good job or not. If you're cleaning your bed and if you do a good job, you will know if you're basically doing anything, right? If you do a good job of it, you will know that you've done a good job, that you've given your best. And if you didn't, and if you're pretending, and if you're doing just things on the surface, you'll know about it. Internally, you'll know about it, right? And you can only pretend to a certain extent. You can't lie to yourself, right? And even in the process of growing uh, professionally, personally, right? The less you lie to yourself, the better it is. That's the way I look at it. And so that's the only goalpost or a goalpost for personal growth, personal development, professional growth, professional development.
And what are kind of, obviously, we've spoken about the Madras Courier and this, your sort of interest in just basically your curiosity, right? To know things and to be like, oh, why is this like this? Why is that like that? So then what are the kind of stories or writers that have kind of stuck with you, say from a young age or just generally in life till now? Like, what are some of the books, pieces, just, pieces of writing that have really stuck with you and influenced you in any way?
In fiction, Salman Rushdie is my all-time favorite,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Arundhati Roy too.
Oh,
She's such
okay.
a great writer. Um, I also like J.K. Rowling.
Okay. A lot of
Um,
people like J.K. Rowling, that's fine.
yeah, sure. Very different styles of writing, very different stories in fiction. I like them. I also like, in serious non-fiction books. Um, I enjoy reading Kushwant Singh. He's a great writer. Um, uh, Indian authors, and I generally am quite a nerd for. I When I read non-fiction, my mind is constantly assessing, analyzing. But when I read fiction, I'm imagining, right? So I read a lot of spy fiction too. So I read this book called The $1 Billion Spy, uh,
Oh, okay.
which is very interesting. So I have a lot of writers that I can name, but I guess these are writers that are my absolute favorites.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair.
In fiction, there's also another writer I must mention. I guess it's Arvind Adiga. Yeah. When I read The White Tiger, I was just blown away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think these are like classics for sure. A lot of people really take to these writers. I think for me, the one book which I always mention on the podcast is Little Women, Louisa May Alcott. That's one story that has always just like stuck with me. Um, yeah, I think for me, more nonfiction is something more recently I've really started getting into. Last book I read was Beef, Brahmins, and Broken Men, which was a selection of essays by B.R. Ambedkar. They are very fascinating. So yeah, I think literature can be really a lot of fun if you're willing to give it a chance, for sure. But yeah, now coming towards the last two questions of the interview. So the first one is, what are your aspirations? These can be, personal, professional, creative, just things you're looking forward to in the near or even distant future.
I would really like to see in my lifetime, I would really like to see the Madras Courier flourish into a leading global publication. I started it with that intention, and I would really like to see that happen. That is the one professional, also personal ambition that you could say that drives me, wakes me up, gets me excited, keeps me awake. I'd also like to spend a lot more time writing. My career as an author is just beginning, and I'd like to see a lot more books. There are so many stories that I want to tell. And so I'd like to spend a lot more time pursuing this.
No. And more power to you on that. Can't wait to read your first book. I think history in general is something that's, I think, really now picking up a lot of interest. So very curious to see, what you come out with. And yeah, finally, what is a piece of advice or learning, you'd like to share? Again, this can be personal, professional, just, something you've kind of learned in life and you've experienced and you wish more people were aware of.
If you want to do something, do it. It's like this is not a Nike commercial, but if you want to do something, just do it. Think about it, meditate about it, meditate on it, figure out a way to do it, and do it. You live once, and life is a gift, and it's an opportunity to accomplish things that you really, truly want to accomplish. And there are so many tools that are available to you to make what you want to do come to fruition, right? A lot of what you want to do, an idea, a germ in your head can become a reality. And I've experienced that with Madras Courier, and I really hope, I brought it to life, and I want it to sort of fly on my own terms, right? Without compromising on the key essentials of what it needs to be. And I say this with all genuineness, I say this with the intention that, if there is an intention, if there is a goal, if there is a germ of an idea or a seed in your head, which is burning in your heart, make sure you work towards it. You put your energy and effort and channelize that to make it a reality. I guess that's one learning that I keep telling myself.
Okay.
So on your podcast, on your show, I'm saying that.
No, and on that lovely note, we now come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for being here, Shrenik. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I'm so happy you could be here. I hope you had fun.
Thank you. It was great fun. It was great fun. And it was wonderful talking to you. And thank you for reaching out to me.
So that was my conversation with Shrenik Rao. I had so much fun talking to him, and it was really interesting to learn about the Madras Courier and his perspective on journalism. Closing this episode with an excerpt from an article titled The Eternal Panchatantra, written and narrated by Shrenik. And with that, season 3 comes to a close. I know this was a shorter season, but stay tuned for season 4, which is coming up in the next few months. More on that soon, but stay tuned till then. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next season with new guests and new chronicles to share. Talk real soon.
Stories live forever. They adapt, change form, and survive through centuries. They proliferate in new avatars and travel across the globe. In the process, they impart wisdom, transform lives, and leave an indelible imprint on the human imagination. The Panchatantra, a collection of animal fables written centuries ago, is one such story. Written in Sanskrit around 300 CE, it continues to entertain and enlighten people with its charming tales. Through the centuries, it took on many avatars and evolved into various literary forms. No other collection of stories has become so popular through the length and breadth of India. It has been worked over and over again, expanded, abstracted, turned into verse, retold in prose, translated into medieval and modern vernaculars, and retranslated into Sanskrit, writes Franklin Edgerton, professor of Sanskrit and comparative philology, in his book The Panchatantra Reconstructed. Today, most of the stories contained in the Panchatantra have become part of Indian folklore. It has been translated into numerous languages globally, enacted as plays, narrated as oral history, and adapted as novellas, television series, and comics.